G'day everybody. For today's video, I am going to be walking you through some of my work on Frag Kingdom 2. So as most of you are aware, in less than 2 months, the crowdfunding for this project is going to go live. And yeah, I'm excited and nervous. You always get those feelings. I've been working on this project full time for a couple of years now, building on what we did with Fragged Empire 2. And I'm excited. I'm excited. But I like to be an open book. I like to just share with all of you what I'm making, why I made certain decisions. I like this sort of behind the scenes stuff. And yeah, so down below, for you guys who don't want to watch this whole video of me just rambling through some of the stuff here, you can go to the sign up page right now. The link will be below. Just click that. I find it's very helpful to sort of, and you'll get an email once things go live. Cool. Okay, so let's jump into this. So we've got two primary products here for Frag Kingdom 2. We have the rulebook and the setting guide book, just like I did for Fragged Empire 2. And I also want to explain a little bit here too. So I have redone the lore for Frag Kingdom quite substantially. Now, I didn't want to remove any of the previous lore we've done. So what I've done is I've moved the timeline forward 200 years. So this makes quite a substantially different setting. Okay. And I'm going to jump into the specifics of that later, but I wanted to, when I'm creating a world, one of the things I like to do is I like to lock down the core pillars, the things that people find the most interesting and exciting, and really double and triple down on those. And I thought with Frag Kingdom, this artwork here of the knight charging the mechanid is just a really iconic picture, and I felt like this really summed up, I thought, the most exciting part of Frag Kingdom is this sort of idea that it's got this fantasy mixed in with a sci-fi and the sort of, techno magic and this idea of deifying sci-fi objects or people or mythologizing events. So, for example, the Mechanids are known as the children of Pole, who are these mad servants of the dead god of metal and magic. And I like that. I also like this idea of this is a world without humans or like the classic elves or dwarves or even horses. Okay, and I thought that was also summed up in this picture. So this picture here was the cornerstone that I held in my mind. In fact, I sat this picture up on my screen as I was plotting out the lore, because I want to keep myself anchored. And I find that this is a useful trait with world building is it's fun to go off in the weeds and all the little details and the texture and the little bits and bobs. Like that stuff's interesting. I love that stuff. But you got to make sure that it's all anchored to your primary pillars, your primary themes of what's going on. So yeah, let's jump into this. So I'll just close this one down. And the other part of a world building here and rules is the character sheet. Okay, so I've got my key artwork for the setting. Then I've got the character sheet here. Now, for any of you guys who are budding game designers, start with your character sheet. Your character sheet is effectively the cheat sheet to your game. Okay, it is telling people what rules are important, what mechanics are important. It sets the vibe. This is the object that if people have in front of them when they game more than anything else, it's the bit they interact with more than your rule book. So this thing needs to be tight and it needs to be clear and it needs to, and those of you who are experienced RPGers can look at a character sheet and instantly you should be able to know what sort of game this is. Is this some sort of rules light OSR thing? Is it some wacky, zany, all over the place thing? Is it a crunchier thing? Is it like a mechanized mech game with lots of bits and bobs that click together? Okay, so but thankfully we've done a lot of work in Fragged Empire 2, so I kind of already had it locked down, but I wanted to do a few little improvements here and a few little tweaks to show this is different. So those of you who are coming over from Fragged Empire, you'll immediately notice you've got a different section up here, this thing called Bonds and Drive, and a little place here for your coat of arms. Okay, so this is a new mechanic. It was touched on in Fragged Empire 2 as an optional complication rule, but now it's a core thing. Is that when you create your character, you will define these bonds, like who is your lord, what's your religion, your mentor, your friend, your rival. Write all of these down. Okay, and this is primarily their narrative to sort of tie your character to the world and to NPCs in the world. And then you've got your drive, which is a thing that motivates your character that's connected to one of these bonds. And so let's say, for example, you're a character who fears the gods because you're taught by your mentor. Okay, the gods are not to be trusted. And so you'd write that down, and that's connected to your mentor, and you put that in there. And then in the game, you can substitute a roll for a drive roll with using your resolve skill. So let's say you want to run really far. Okay, you're running away from a god or a god servant, more to the point. Okay, so normally that would be a physical roll, but because it aligns with your drive, you say, well, I am so motivated to get away, I will make a resolve roll instead. Okay, so you substitute other skills. So it's a little bit there. I know I'm just brushing over this, but you'll immediately know that's different. Then you've got the combat sheet here. And you will see a couple of few things here have changed from Fragged Empire too. So first, I've sort of made it a bit more clearer where you can write out your defense for the different covers. That's just a useful thing to do. You'll also notice here you've got a resistance stat. So what resistance is armor, but for endurance damage. Now this was in Fragged Empire too, but it was just a special ability, like reduce endurance damage against you by 1 to a minimum of 1. That's now just been given a keyword that everybody's got. It's primarily gained from your shield. Okay, it's a way of making people so what you use in your offhand is very important in a fantasy game. Like you got your sword. Do you have a two-handed sword? Do you have a sword and shield? Do you have sword and torch? Or you're a mage with like a two-handed staff, or like a focus and a free hand. That stuff important. So if you had a shield, that's an important choice for your offhand, and so resistance plays a bigger role there. You'll also notice that there is no innate weapon. This is because innate or improvised attacks, so it's like sort of the hilt of your sword or your shield bash someone, you are asked to simply make a skill roll for that. And that has been normalized, so it's a lot quicker and easier. And the reason I want it to be quick and easier without the mechanics here, because it's the sort of thing that you might just come up once in a game. You're in a fight inside a room, you pick up a chair and you throw it across the room. Simple skill roll, damage, done. Okay, this encourages people to feel like improvised attacks are quick and easy to do. There's no mental load for it, and it can come up more often in your games. Arcane rolls also are going to get a much larger role in Frag Kingdom, which makes sense because it's a much more prominent part of the setting. And yeah, then you've got your third sheet here. So no spacecraft. Instead of a spacecraft, your team will have a camp. This is a camp that you all build together, and then you get various different developments like a backpack or a pack animal or a wagon, or extra provisions, and you sort of add that to your camp, and this is where you get your workshops from. It also gives you a little modifications to your character, very big on your recovery. Your camp is vital to how quickly you recover, but then also some perks to do with permissions from NPCs to do with travel, and storage is all defined by your attributes here as well. So the camp that is completely replaces the spacecraft rules from Fragged Empire. Then you've got your NPC sheet here. So this is for the GM. Just a quick sort of summary for them, statting up henchmen and troops and skilled and nemesis NPCs. Cool. So that is, if you're an experienced RPGer or you're familiar with the Frag territory IPs, that's going to give you the full vibe of the game. Just look at the character sheet, and then you look at these artwork, And you're like, oh yeah, guy riding a funky bird with a crashed spaceship in the background, and what's going on with this weird giant? It's like a biotech monster, okay? And that will give you the cut through line, what Fragged Kingdoms is going to be like, and if that's all you need to know, cool, you can stop the video right here. But for those of you who want to go a little bit deeper, let's jump into the setting guide book. So I won't go deep into the rules today. I'll save that for another video, but let's do a quick overview of the setting. Little intro pages here, and then this is sort of like the summary text, you know. New and ancient gods stir in the wild and techno-magical world of Acheron. Malicious forces gather within and around the kingdom of Aya as her aging demigod kings nears death. Will you fight for her future? That's it. That's the big text that sums you up. Setting, techno-magical world, you're in the kingdom of Aya, there's a bunch of pressures, what you're going to do to contribute. Then we've got the world map here, so this is much larger than first edition. Most of the action is going to be going on here, okay? But this helps to give you context of sort of the northern jungles. You might have colonies up here, or way over here, the western giants on the continent of Mammon. Now, this is specifically not the entire world, okay? I don't tell you anything about what's going on up here to the far north. You'll notice that the equator is up here, so there might be even more further north of here, and you might find another continent out here to the east. I really want you as a GM and your own campaigns to feel free to expand things. Okay, then we do these little summaries of the species. So this is one of the new species. This is the Crete. Okay, now unlike in Fragged Empire, where there was a really, it was sort of just these 2 pages. In Fragged Kingdom, I've got these 2 intro pages and then a little intro text, okay, to sum up each species here. So these are the Crete. I won't read all the intro blurb for that, but we'll push forward. They're the very much distrust the gods. They get along with animals, and yeah. They don't trust metal. Metal is seen as a divine material. Then we have the Drasim. So this is a type of Nephilim. So the reason I didn't want normal Nephilim to be a playable species in Frag Kingdom is because Nephilim they are so diverse, they're super monstrous. And I feel like that just wouldn't quite work in a fantasy setting to have this one cluster of people that are just so wild and all over the place in their natural features and their cultures and presentation. And so I've narrowed it down to this one specific type of Nephilim. These are Drasim. They are created by dragons and hatched from dragon eggs, and they're created to be basically slaves, workers and soldiers for the dragons. And many of them over the years have ended up out from underneath the dragon's tyranny. They found themselves to the kingdom of Aya, and they're starting to establish themselves as a people. But of course, they've still got that quite monstrous history, a lot of sort of social baggage there, struggle for self-identity. So you still got that Nephilim bits in there. You've also got still a bunch of diversity in terms of their nature, because you can have Drasim from different draconic heritage. So like storm ones are fire or poison. Some have wings, some don't. You know, so there's still a lot of variety there. So if you like that monstrous character, Drasim's a good choice there. Cool. You'll also, so these little bands down the side here, you will notice, this is me telling you the true truth of what's going on behind sort of connecting Frag Kingdom to the Fragged Empire lore. So for example, in Frag Kingdom, you don't know these are Drasim, okay? Oh, so you don't know these are Nephilim, and then it's sort of explaining, well, what's the true nature of how they came about. With the Crete, there's this history about how they fled from the gods and they hid away, and then they sort of a bit all secretive, and then the true insight, the secret insight is sort of telling you, okay, it's like colonists crashed on Acheron and they destroyed their technology so they wouldn't attract mechanids and psionic nanites, okay? And so you kind of got this this true history, and then how it's mythologized. Um, and that's just there to create a bit of a narrative framework and a deeper depth to these characters. Okay, then you've got the Kaltorans. So this is an example. This is a witch who is an enchanter. And one of the things that's really interesting about Kaltorans is the Kaltorans in a Fragged Kingdom setting is completely different from a Fragged Empire setting. Because in Fragged Empire, they're all struggling from PTSD, from living underground and cannibalism. Okay, but then what happens when you've got many generations of Kaltorans that don't have all that? They've got more other memories. The deep, dark ancestral terrors are sort of a distant fog to them. And so they start to return more to the Kaltorans of how the Archons intended it to be, which is they're a very hyper specialized people. Okay, so if you were a farmer for 20 generations, you have a head full of those memories. It's very hard to be anything but a farmer. Okay, and then you start thinking about who are you going to marry, because your offspring are going to have the shared traits, the shared sort of mental wisdom of you both. So you might find someone from a complementary skill set to your own family. But then the nobles would have the same thing about this. What if you've got this big, dark, noble secret and your kids are born, and they might be like, well, they're going to remember this thing that we did. So we have to be really careful about that, because once they turn teenagers, the family secret is going to be out in their head. And so, yeah, I find that interesting. They also really struggle to let go of grudges and things like that. Okay, then you have the Legion. So the Legion in Fragged Empire, the Legion, they struggle to fit in. What is the use for a giant, big, muscly, genetically engineered super soldier, in a sci-fi world? And that's pretty much just to be mercs for the corp. Okay, because you have machinery that can do muscle stuff. Okay, you can get robots who can do lots of the fighting, and there's guns. Okay, and you've got all these limitations, like you'd like it to be cold and things like that. Okay, they quite struggle because they're not an economically focused people, but you throw them into a much more dangerous world where strength and fighting ability, and even just from an economic point of view, being strong and muscular is a great advantage. The amount that you can get the value you can get for your physical labor is a lot more. And so the Legion kind of really, they're quite prominent in terms of their significance in the setting, because there's a lot of them who are nobles and knights, but also blacksmiths and laborers. Okay, they don't have the economic woes of Fragged Empire, but then a lot of them are also like these sort of raiding Viking style ones who come from the Arctic South as well. So then you've got the Remnant. So the Remnant have a really different history in Fragged Kingdom. So the Remnant have this big thing, whereas quite frankly, they are just better than everybody else, because mechanics wise, they have extra attributes, so they're smarter and stronger and more agile. And in the lore, some of the greatest heroes and the greatest villains have been Remnant. Okay, they seem to be always altering history and challenging civilization. So, like for example, the big ones like the Archdruid was a Remnant. Okay. So I've enjoyed sort of fleshing them out, giving them a new place that's really not necessarily tied to the All Being. Yes, a lot of them are still part of the All Faith, but the All Faith is not seen as primarily a remnant thing. It's the All Faith is seen more of a religion for the impoverished. It's very popular among slaves and servants and peasants and stuff like that. Now, granted, a lot of Remnant do have a enslaved sort of history, so it's still connections there. Then you got the Tolatl. So the Tolatl are just this tiny little side species in Fragged Empire, okay? Where no one knows where they're going to do or what their place is going to be or whether they're even going to be around for that long. as they've just escaped the Oni. But in Frag Kingdom, the Toladal are incredibly important. These guys, many of the nobles and the rulers of the ancient empire of Katla were the Toladal. So a lot of them come from positions of authority. So a lot of them were not just nobles, but also priests and mages and stuff like that as well. Which I really like the idea of the goblin-like species being the boss species. So yeah, that's fun. I really like fleshing them out more. Uh, then we have the Twyfar. So the Twyfar, they do still feel a lot like the Twyfar from Fragged Empire in that sort of got that sort of mystic, sort of very tied to the spirits, tied to their Farron sort of cultural touchstone or cultural cornerstone there. And I think that's because the Farron, they're basically spirits. I mean, they're basically space magic in Fragged Empire. So that transfers over into Frag Kingdom quite closely here. But one thing that's big in the Frag Kingdom world is that the ethereal spirits, aka Farron, there is lots of them. Lots and lots and lots and lots. Way more of them than there are Twyfar. And so they've started to figure out how do we make connections with other species, because the Farron love to connect. They love to bond. Now, they can't enter the bodies and become part of the being of other species like they can with the Twyfar, but they can still, there's sort of like, there's like a mage called the Essence, where you kind of collect the spirits a little bit like Pokemon. Okay. So the Twyfar have been fun, sort of fleshing out a lot of that sort of stuff in there. Then you have the twin-blooded. So this is when you have the mixed ancestry. So this one, for example, here is a Drasim and a Twyfar parents. And you can basically, you've got select two, and you just pick who your parents are, and they give you different abilities. And so this is if you want to have a bit more of a complicated sort of ancestry. But also a big thing with the twin-blooded is that primarily most of them, unless you're part Drasim or Nefspawn, you can't have offspring. And this means that you're excluded from lineage in this setting. And that's a big deal because a lot of groups run on lineage, okay? Family lineage is a much more bigger thing in a medieval society. And so that means that they're not nobles, okay? A lot of them have been sort of pushed more out into sort of, so some of them might take up sort of like priest sort of role and stuff like that. But they're always going to be on the outskirts. Cool. Okay. Then after that, we start getting into the wild folk. The wild folk is basically a term for all the other Misk. Okay. So this is a big difference between Frag Kingdom and Fragged Empire. In Frag Kingdom, you've got many more playable species, just much more species diversity. Whereas in Fragged Empire, it was kind of, okay, here are the playable and the NPC species, and you've got roughly sort of 12 in total. And then you have great amount of, okay, here's the subcultures within each species. Okay, that's how it was organized. But in Frag Kingdom, there's just a lot more of like, you go out into the wild and you discover stuff. You discover new species, lost species or mythical species. Very strange things like what is a vampire and a lichen and what are these weird automotions and stuff like that. And some of these can also be playable characters. And so this is wild folk is the general term for all of that sort of unknown category. So not as much detail for this, but this is because I want players and GMs to fill in the gaps for these ones a lot more. But there's enough here to sort of get you started. Okay, so then we've got the automotions and the different types of ones there. For some reason it went the other way. Okay, then we've got elementals, dryads, and nymphs. So this is effectively Zhao. So elementals, and then dryads and nymphs are a much more classic sort of Zhao. But then elementals are much more common, but they're a type of Zhao where they've been genetically engineered. So they've still got their hunger, but they can't grow and multiply. So this means that Zhao aren't just going to eat the whole planet, okay? And I really love this artwork, okay? Then you've got the Fae. So you've got fairies and imps and pixies and sprites. So this is what happens when psionic nanites basically overinfest an animal and they turn it into the sort of mythical creature, magical creature with sort of heightened intelligence and stuff like that. So it's effectively like, can turn a butterfly into this massive this is very powerful enchanted creature. Goblins are what happens when the nanites infest basically a child, and this child will continue to grow. But you kind of got this is it Benjamin Dutton? I can't remember the name of the character, but this idea that like they don't get larger, they don't mature, but they still age, and so their bodies turns still sort of wrinkly, and their ears and noses keep getting bigger, but they don't get taller. They've still got a childlike mind, but they get this massive amount of enchanting power. So goblins in this world are like very, very powerful, quite significant. Much more, I think, folklore sort of take on goblins and fae and stuff. Now, an elf is actually a type of mythical Kaltora who use these nanites to remove their ancestral memories. And so they've got their own special role within the setting. I won't dive into that too deep, but they are feared by Kaltorans. Okay, and there's this fear that they could mix in amongst them, and then their children will be born and they won't have the ancestral memories, and that's viewed as a great tragedy. Okay. Then after that, so sorry, we don't have the artwork for these yet, but it's getting worked on. So Neph spawn. So this is the various types of Nephilim creatures or Nephilim infected creatures, so like vampires and lichens and stuff like that. Okay, then we have the short story, and that's sort of the introducing you to the new characters and what's going on there, and then the history of the world. So I'm going to push through here. I won't be going into a deep dive into everything, but we've pushed the timeline forward to 200 years. You get the Druidic War here, and then what happens is you've got these new nations have formed and these new gods have come about, and so this is the pantheon. This is the eternal pantheon here. You've got Ak and Ath and Corp and Dos. Dos is a new one, is the evil god. Dre and Etzo and Fick and Jin and Jop Jop and Neph and Jin and Nix and Pole and Ugrathok. This is sort of taking you through sort of the ancient history. So this is Pole's Rest and Stronghold and what happens here, the rise of Langarum. And then Neph dies. She was killed by Fick, and the whole world saw her head plummet to the planet in a giant fireball, which was effectively the spaceship that was orbiting the planet was killed, and it crashed down. Then you had the rise of a demigod, Hercule Noskos, who found the Spear of Ire and started this big civil war, and then created these two nations. So this is the kingdom of Ire. So this is effectively, you've got another big kingdom off here, which is the kingdom of Katla, which they were once all united. The kingdom of Ire, these are the rebels who split off. And you can think about this nation as sort of being a nation of nations in a way, in that all of these domains are very quite culturally different to each other, and they're held together by basically a common threats all around them, and just the prominence of their of the demigod king, who is acting kind of a figurehead that keeps them all culturally together and protects them. So you've got the Bloodstone Desert out here. The Langarum has taken over Stronghold and Pole's Rest, which is down here. Got the Twisted Forest up the north here, so a lot of frontier settlements. I love doing campaigns up there. Then you've got the White Expanse with the Southern Legion tribes down here. And then, so sort of fleshing out all the different stuff in this nation. So this is one of the most prominent nations, so it gets a big write-up. Then you've got the Holy Kingdom of Katla, who's next to them, so they also get a big write-up. And so this is, I won't go into all of the details in this, but really liking the setting. We've got the Twisted Forest up here. They're sort of going through all the different regions. Then we've got some of the monsters here, the trolls. Trolls get a giant, much more fleshed out. Now I really like trolls. They're great. Um, the Warped Kingdom with the dragon Langram. So the Langram has been redrawn. I redesigned him up to be much more this eldritch horror sort of idea. So it's one of the big bad guys, one of the demigods in the world. The Elementals, the Drason clan. Then you have, these are some of the more distant nations. So this is the Tarquinius Republic, who's far off to the east. And they have these giant big blue boars, which I love. And then we've got the Panos Theocracy, and the Kingdom Romanos, the Kraken Isle Pirates, the Eastern Twyfar. So this is where many of the Twyfar who aren't from the Bloodstone Desert originate. So a lot of these sort of nations get smaller write-ups, but just sort of like touch base on them, Giants are a much more prominent thing in the world now, and Southern Legion tribes, and then we start diving into all of the religion and the arcane. So I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this graphic in the final book. I was sort of playing around with this idea about doing a calendar. So this is a year-long calendar with all the religious festivals in here, that's a much more prominent thing. Like as part of life in medieval societies, you pretty much had monthly festivals, monthly events happened, which tied the community together and tied them to through their religious bonds. And then you've got the different cosmologies of the different faiths. So according to I love this one. This is the traditional Tardai believe that Acheron is on the shell of a giant snail, who is wandering through the void of space. Then the eternal priesthood, they believe that the suns are orbiting the planet. The gods Ak and Ath are sort of orbiting the world. And then the All Faith has much like, no, we are a planet that is orbiting our twin suns like that. So maybe this will end up in the final book. We'll see. I need to think about that one. And then we jump into the different religions. So this is the All Faith and the All Being. Then we get into the Eternal Priesthood. So a big thing when designing religions is think about religions in a medieval society is a much larger container. Okay, and in that container is many more things. So we have cultural cohesion, we have sort of shared understanding of history and our place in our world. So sort of philosophy goes in there. You make this a fantasy made-up setting. You also get the idea about a lot of education, a lot of magic sort of being put in there in one in this these large containers, and these containers cover the whole thing. So a priest is expected to be able to have input on sort of all these different parts, okay? Whereas in our modern society, we break things up into much smaller containers, okay? We say, this is the container of science. This is the container of history. This is the container of education. These are the containers of entertainment. These are the containers of cultural bonds, okay? They're all separated out, and then whereas that's not how things would work in this sort of society. All of those would be clumped together. Yeah, so this idea of the eternal priesthood, and you got this idea of like a temple of Corp, and this divine artifact, which is a spaceship engine, on prominent display. Then you've got Ak. So I love this artwork for Ak, who is the yellow sun god, the father of civilization, and so there's this multi-armed Toladal-like god. So I love that. Going for a much more South American sort of aesthetic too. Then we've got the arcane wielders of Pole, who then Ath and Ab. Dos is one of the new gods here. So he is a god. He is an evil god. He is a god from another planet. Okay, and he came to Acheron in search for Mon, the creator god, but Mon had already turned to dust at this stage. And the idea is that Mon, when he made a world, he would create a pantheon for each world to look over it. So Dos is very much wrong. He's not supposed to be here, okay? And so he is, in truth, either a insane Palandor MVP or a Mechanid who has put his consciousness into a nanite swarm, and so these can create. Like, this is where like demons and evil and all that sort of stuff comes from. Cool. So I really like them, and then Dre and Etso, Thick and Jop Jop. I really like Jop Jop's write-up. Jop Jop's the goddess of justice. Then we have Ninjin and Jinin. So these are the replacements for Neff. So when Neff died, out of her blood, which is this giant big lake of wilding, these two goddesses were born, these twins. And so Ninjin is the domain of life and death, and Jinin is the domain of death and life. And so it's this idea that they're a partnership, they're a pairing. And there's this big question is like, is civilization going to mistreat these goddesses like they did their mother? And so that I like to explore that a lot more. The big reason why I wanted Neff to die is that Neff was the big villain of Frag Kingdom 1. Okay, I kind of want to close her book on that story, and start a new book. So I thought if we pulled her forward, I'd have to pull forward all of those same themes. But yeah. So anyway, I really like this. Love this artwork, by the way. I'm really happy with the artist's work on this. And then we got Nyx, the goddess of the underworld and trickery and enchantment. So she's going to be a much more prominent figure. She is arguably the most powerful of the goddesses now. And then Ugrathok is the god of consumption, is the giant. He's an Oni. And then we got the Tardai religion. So this is a much more animistic religion. Sorry, I am running through these so quickly. I keep wanting to stop and talk about each one in detail. But this is a sort of the different types of spirits. Okay, so you've got Haron is a life giver. And you've got the different Bippin, the craftsman, and Colopsy, the storm nymph. So don't think about these guys like a pantheon, but think about it like this is an example set of great spirits. Okay. And the Tardai would believe in the eternal gods, but they would think, oh, they're just other great spirits. Okay. We're still working on the artwork for this. So this is the fairy monarchs, Fodnir and Kallio. And yeah, keep chipping through this. And that's it. So that's a setting guide book. I am very happy with how that's going. You can still see, obviously, a few little bits to do. And then the rule book, so we won't go over this now, but you can see that this has got the same sort of treatment as the other book. Okay, cool. I hope you guys had fun. And I am really looking forward to doing another video for you all. And we'll go into a deep dive into some of the rules. And let me know if you've got any questions in the comments. And I will post a link to the landing page for the upcoming crowdfunding. Cool. Thanks so much, everybody.